okay? Yeah, perfect. So, as Tim mentioned, I get the opportunity to open up this discussion panel with a few of my own insights into water usage in the data center industry. And I think anybody who's been involved in the industry has seen how water has kind of gone from a background utility to one of the most visible and scrutinized resources that we manage. The conversations that I have today about data centers are increasingly about water usage, its environmental impact, and sustainability. And the constraints being placed on data centers due to those concerns are fundamentally changing the way that we think about water. Water usage is becoming one of the key factors in site selection and design choices. So, as Tim mentioned, my name is John Bychkowski. I'm the global applications lead for our data center group within Chem-Aqua. Chem-Aqua is an international water treatment company supporting over 500 data centers globally with their water management strategies. We provide chemistry, expertise, equipment, and monitoring solutions. And from that vantage point, we've seen just how quickly expectations are evolving. Historically, when we talked about water efficiency in data centers, we relied on a relatively simple metric: how much water the facility used in relation to the overall power consumption of IT equipment. It's your WE. However, that can often only be a portion of your overall water usage and footprint. Indirect water consumption, primarily driven by water associated with power generation from thermoelectric plants, for example, can have a significant impact on your water usage. And then how can we, as an industry, start accounting for those indirect users in our water use metrics so we can truly move to more sustainable practices? Innovations that we're already having in the industry are helping us meet those goals. One of the primary transformations that we've seen is the rise in different cooling technologies. This is primarily driven by the rise in high-density computing and AI workloads. As rack densities have been increasing, air-cooled server halls are being pushed to their limits. We're seeing liquid-cooled technologies being adopted into data centers. From a water perspective, this has been an interesting shift. Many of those facilities and designs operate, and they have reduced and even removed the need for evaporative cooling. Closed-loop dry-cooled and hybrid approaches are enabling facilities to operate with far less dependence on water. However, as we move to these more advanced cooling architectures, that the quality of that water and how we monitor it is becoming increasingly significant. These can be far less forgiving systems. Poor commissioning, incorrect chemistry and treatment, and unplanned deviations in fluid quality can lead to scaling, corrosion, and biological issues that have a direct impact on system performance and reliability. So, while these systems might be using less water, the quality of that water and how we manage it is becoming increasingly significant and more critical. And that leads us to some of the broader challenges ahead. We're in one of the fastest growing industries, and there's no sign that's slowing down. As digital services expand and AI adoption accelerates, the infrastructure for that is going to need to scale accordingly. And how can we ensure that we're utilizing resources responsibly as we scale? Water management strategies must be looked at from a strategic perspective rather than a purely financial one. And that means we have to ask different questions and being flexible with site design choices. Are we designing cooling systems that are appropriate for the specific water conditions of a region? How do we diversify water sources, whether it's reclaimed wastewater, industrial effluent, or alternative supply streams? Are we investing in water treatment and reuse projects to reduce demand on potable water? And equally as important is how do we future-proof those designs to adapt as conditions change? The good news is we're not starting from scratch. There are already proven strategies and technologies available today that will improve water efficiency and reduce the risk and enhance sustainability. What is changing is the pace in which we need to adopt those technologies and the level of collaboration across multiple professions: operators, engineers, water treatment and utility providers, and even local communities. We have the opportunity to demonstrate that data centers can scale in a way that both ensures high performance and achieve sustainability targets. But it is up to us to achieve that balance. That's why forums like this are going to be so important. Sharing knowledge, aligning on best practices, and being willing to challenge longstanding assumptions on how data centers should operate will be critical to moving this industry forward. So with that, Tim, I think we'll get into the broader discussion.
Thank you very much indeed. And may I ask Matt Rutherford to join us on stage. Matt is from Evapco. I'm going to ask Matt to introduce himself a little more. Your slide tells you we've got Jeff Hargreaves here. Jeff's been unable to make it, so it's the three of us to pick up John from where you left off. Matt, we've already met John. Could you perhaps just introduce yourself a bit more and make sure we're all up to speed with Evapco?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm from Evapco, and what did Evapco do? I think your company probably had dealings with Evapco for a long, long time before data centers really been a topic of discussion. At Evapco, we are a manufacturer of heat rejection equipment. So we manufacture the stuff that goes on the roof, the stuff that gets rid of all that heat that's generated in the white space. We're the guys that eventually eject that into the atmosphere, although that obviously there's some initiatives about maybe reclaiming that. In the main, whatever heat is generated in the white space has to be ejected somewhere or another. And we make all different types of cooling systems. We make cooling towers, obviously the brand Evapco. Our origins are in evaporative cooling, but we manufacture all different types of coolers. We manufacture dry coolers, we manufacture adiabatic coolers, hybrid coolers, closed loop cooling towers, hybrid cooling towers, open loop cooling towers, you name it, we manufacture it. So we don't really have an axe to grind one way or another. I think when people are introduced to me, they probably expect me to be, trying to push the evaporative agenda, but really we don't. Most of what we supply to data centers is dry. That is the growing trend. But my job at Evapco is to help consultants and designers and end users understand the difference between using a cooling tower and using a dry cooler, the two ends of the spectrum and everything in between. And it's a fact, if you use water, you use less electricity. So what I do on a daily basis is try and help designers, consultants, end users, etc., find that balance, the balance between PUE and WUE. And as I say, no axe to grind. We look at it, we look at all technologies, and we help them assess which is the best one for their particular project, whether it's site-specific, because it may vary from site to site. So we could be looking at a project in the Middle East where there is no water, or we could be looking at a project in the Nordics, which is super cold, and we can go dry. Or we may have the availability of industrial wastewater, grey water, etc., which means that there isn't necessarily the same scrutiny put under its use. And if you apply water, in some instances, you can reduce your electricity consumption of the cooling plant many times. So yeah, that's what we do. We manufacture the equipment, and we also, on a consultative level, help end users understand which is the best technology on a site-specific basis.
Thank you, Matt. That's helpful. Can I pick up, John, on something that you touched on in your opening comments, and kick off with making water management and cooling at the heart of your decision-making from the get-go? I'm already picking up that site selection, even that early, you guys should be involved in those strategic decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're looking at site discussions, you have to look at what that source water quality is going to be, what's available to you. Is that going to be a uniform resource that you're going to consistently have? Are you going to have variable makeup water sources? And all that is going to come into play in terms of your water management strategy. What kind of pre-treatment equipment you might need to get water quality, to get your best efficiency out of it. If you're using reclaimed water, gray water, purple pipe water is what some other people might call it. There's a lot of different considerations that you're going to have to take into account to design your water treatment plant. And so the more people that come into play in the early stages, you can kind of iron out a lot of the issues you might have down the road.
But do you find clients sometimes wrongly, inadvertently regard you as a bolt-on later on in the design stage?
Yeah, absolutely. We often come into facilities and they're saying this is what we have and this is the water you're going to work with, and at that point, you have to kind of let them know we'll operate like that. But these are the hurdles that you're going to have to overcome in terms of maybe increased risk, reduced efficiencies, those kind of considerations.
And I guess not just operational risk and efficiency, because water and power are the two biggest things which turn the public and civic society against data centers now.
I think water particularly at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misunderstanding there. I've heard people say, for example, that if you use water, I think they often perhaps imagine that they're just pouring it over the chips. You know, I've heard that on the television. I've heard comedians say that they're against AI because of the data centers and the energy they consume, and you know, they pour water over the chips to cool them, which obviously isn't true. And I think it's important to separate what's going on in the process pipework in the white space, which is a sealed system. So the fluid system and the liquid cooling that goes on in a data center in the white space, that's no different to your central heating system at home. We're not constantly topping that up with water. It's obviously it's heating rather than cooling, but it's a sealed system. The fluid in those pipes is the same fluid on a daily basis. Where the type of water consumption we are talking about when we're talking about our equipment, the heat rejection, that's the evaporative or the latent cooling effect you get from evaporating water, or the adiabatic effect of depressing the dry bulb. And then it's a trade-off. What benefit do you get out of evaporating 1 litre of water? How much does that reduce your power consumption? Because it will reduce your power consumption, and that's your WUE. And where you come in, John, is where it's a discussion about, well, how much waste? Because when you evaporate a litre of water, there's always a waste element of that. So when we evaporate 1 litre of water, depending on the cycles of concentration, the level of treatment that's been done before that, you have to put a certain amount down the drain. So for every 1 litre of water you evaporate for cooling purposes, you might put 1 litre of water down the drain. Yeah. That'd be COC.
Yeah, 3 cycles.
Yeah. So when we talk about treatment, from our perspective, when you mentioned early on in the proceedings, we have to make some assumptions. So we would say, for example, rule of thumb, generally 3. We'll start with 3, and then we'll ask the question more, how much water treatment are you willing to do? Because it's expensive. You know, if you want to do some reverse osmosis, you might get 1 litre down the drain for every 10 that you evaporate.
But then even in the reverse osmosis process, you got 25-ish% of reject going down the drain.
If it's a cheap reverse osmosis system, but if you throw more money at it, you can get 90%. So it's all crazy. It's CapEx, OpEx. You know, how much value is there in that litre of water? But if it's grey water or your purple pipe water, I'm going to use that a lot now moving forward. I've never heard of that before, but
maybe it's a US term.
It doesn't matter, does it? I mean, it's essentially going to waste anyway. You're utilising something that you're recycling wastewater. So perhaps the net benefit of only operating at maybe 2 cycles of concentration is better to just do that than waste more electricity and chemicals treating a wastewater supply to try and get more use out of it.
Yeah, what's your risk tolerance? You know, all that wastewater, the reclaim might be available, but you know, do you want to run it at those increased cycles? Because you know, you do have higher nutrient loads. You have certain ions within that reclaim water that you know are increasing your scaling potential, for example, and that can precipitate out on heat exchange surfaces, and that's going to reduce efficiency, drive up your power consumption. So you know, you have to, like you said, we're constantly balancing the amount of water that we're using versus you know, power consumption, but also risk factors and how that might impact your performance within the data center.
Yeah, you know, it's a little bit like when you fill your kettle up at home, isn't it? How many times do you boil that kettle and have a cup of tea before you pour the rest of it out and fill it up again? That's the quality of the water. You probably empty your kettle more often if you live in London than you do if you live in Manchester, for example, which is very nice, good quality, potable water. But when you're talking about, and I think that is also the public might perceive when we're talking about water, that it is just potable water, that it's straight out of the tap. But as you say, sometimes it's out of a river, it can be out of a well, you could drill a borehole. There's plenty of water out there. There's not plenty of drinkable water, but the country's a sponge, you know, it's under our feet. There's a water table. If you can access it and it can cut your electricity consumption of your cooling system by 80%, or you even achieve 100% free cooling with no mechanical cooling at all, then you should do it. If you're willing to pay for the water treatment and the drilling, etc., to access that water. So it's a capex question quite often.
Which I want to come to right away, but I should say that we'll pause for some questions from you guys a little later on, if you wish. So if you've got any questions you want to throw at the panel, I'll turn to you in about 20 minutes or so, providing I don't get too engrossed. So from that early design stage, and I think you've just touched upon this, Matt, before you select even what type of cooling and water management strategies you're going to settle on, dry, wet, hybrid, whatever, what questions should operators be asking you two guys because they don't know what they don't know?
Yeah. The initial is, for us, when we come into a system, is where are you pulling your source water from? That's going to have a lot of impact on how we approach the system. And then we ask what kind of equipment they might be planning to have, and certain manufacturers will have certain water quality parameters that you have to meet. And if that source water doesn't meet those parameters, then there might be some pre-treatment that we have to bring in. The softeners, RO, ion exchange. Could be a number of things depending on what the source water quality is and where we need to get it to. So those, kind of some of the primary factors that we look at.
Yeah, I mean, there are some assumptions. I mean, the design process is in steps. So you get your conceptual steps, and then you get into more detailed design as you go on. I'm not entirely sure where you guys step in, but we tend to get involved quite early, or we like to get involved early. Maybe stage 2 of the REBA stages of design, if possible. Sometimes at stage 3. And there has to be some level of assumptions made in terms of what is achievable with reasonable treatment. It could be that they've purchased some land that's adjacent to a river, and they know from day one that this site is going to use that river water, and the municipality is giving us just so many litres a day. Sometimes that is a crucial element of the design. It's not how much water am I going to use over an annual basis, it's how much am I going to use per second. Because I'm only allowed to take so many litres out of the river per day, for example, and then we're designing not necessarily about an annualized figure. We're designing around, well, how can we maintain a PUE, a peak PUE, without extracting so much water out of the river?
And how does that work? I mean, from my experience of certain rivers in this country that I'm well acquainted with, increasingly those river levels are fluctuating. And increasingly, even the local farmers are not allowed to abstract. So how do you cope with those significant and increasing troughs in river flow, if that's your choice of water supply?
Yeah, that's again, when we talk about what your source water quality is it going to be uniform the whole time that you're using it? You start, dropping river levels, for example, you might be pulling in a lot more sediment into your system.
And fish.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. So filtration, your nutrient load, you might need some oxidative chemistry on the front end to deal with that nutrient load and the bacteria that you might bring into the system. But I think you touched on a good point. I mean, sometimes you only have a set amount of water that the municipality is even letting you bring in. So even if you potentially have the amount of water available, you're restricted maybe by the pipe sizing that they're going to give you. And so you have to design your whole system and your water management strategy around what can you actually just physically pull from the system.
Does that mean you're always beholden upon the national water infrastructure, the pipes?
100%,
yeah. I mean, we're seeing more and more data centers in the U.S. especially because of these constraints are building their own on-site wastewater plants to treat that water on their own. So they're starting to bring all these utilities inside the fence. I mean, power generation as well. We're seeing quite a bit of power generation inside the fence of data centers. So their own municipality, their own utility company within the data center.
And that's exactly what I wanted to get onto. I mean, yesterday we were talking about electricity, some fantastic examples of microgrids being set up using biofuels. One fantastic example in Dublin. How far along the road are we with the concept you've just described with water?
we're working on projects right now where they're building wastewater plants on site. They're bringing in their own gas turbines to generate the power. Some places are even going as far as building a combined cycle plant. So they'll have gas turbines run into steam generators to produce their own power on site. So it's already going.
Yep. So these discussions and these strategic issues which we're touching upon, can we just talk about the variation that you are up against and tailoring it site by site? I'm particularly UK, Europe, Ireland.
Yeah, so I think we touched on it quite a bit already about the variations in water chemistry. One of the other important factors that we see a lot is, what are the local regulations on what you can discharge?
Yep.
That's gonna play a big role into potentially how much you can even cycle up your towers, the type of chemistries that you might be able to use, and so as much as everybody would like to have a cookie cutter approach to this design worked well in this area. We treated it with these chemicals, we had this pre-treatment, let's use it over here. There might just be some restrictions that prevent you from doing that.
Yeah, I think if you're a large co-locator and you're rolling out many sites over a short period of time, you do adopt a cookie cutter approach. I think ideally every data center would be different. I think ideally you'd optimize it to its surroundings, you'd optimize it for its for the climate, because climate is a big decisive element in whether or not you need water. You may require water so every single data center, every single project is different, but there are standard designs out there that would incorporate maybe air-cooled chillers, for example. Quick to deploy, don't require water, easy to obtain land for, but would not be as energy efficient as if you were to slow that process down and tailor the site, the facility specifically for the location.
Yeah, and I think the rise in the direct-to-chip cooling is allowing us to be a little bit more cookie cutter, because when you're pulling that heat off of the technical loop, the secondary loop that's doing the direct-to-chip cooling, this is running at really high temperatures, and you're rejecting that heat through a heat exchanger that is then going to a facility loop that's going to dry coolers. And I think most any regions are going to be able to deal with that amount of heat rejection just from a dry cooling perspective.
Yeah, it almost certainly. I think dry cooling is the way it's going to go in the main. Yeah. And the only thing that will be the variable there is how much trim do you need with mechanical cooling. Right. 100% free cooling is definitely possible if you use water. In many regions across, probably in most regions across Europe. For dry cooling, you're probably restricted to, even now, to sort of more northern areas of Europe to achieve that 100% free cooling. At the moment, most facilities will still require some chiller trim at some point to try and take the edge off of the peak temperatures in the summer. You could do that with water, or you can put some air-cooled chillers or water-cooled chillers even to do that for you. So yeah, there's many ways to skin a cat. Some of it can involve water, but I would say, when I look at our pipeline of all the projects we're working on, yes, most probably have dry coolers in the projects at the moment. They're probably the technology that we talk about the most presently. Some huge dry coolers, 20 megawatt chunks of dry cooler, 300 megawatt facilities all running with dry coolers and with some chiller trim. But then we do some very big sites, 200 megawatt facilities with cooling towers, which are using, I would imagine, a huge amount of water, but it's available, they're allowed to use it, so they do. And I would imagine their facilities are incredibly efficient as a result.
Which just underscores the point we're just making, that this cookie cutter approach is not an approach that has any sustainability to it. I mean, you guys have got to be involved from day one in the design for the very reasons you've just enunciated.
I mean, there's a huge amount of consideration goes into that to make it as efficient as possible. But and they'll look at different regions. For example, back in the day, it would be Frankfurt, Dublin, Amsterdam, London, Paris. In America, I guess it's Texas, there's
Virginia,
Dallas,
Texas,
there's some regions you take, and that's purely about the climate. You'll tailor the design to be the best balance across all of those, and it will be as efficient as possible and repeatable as possible. you've got repeatability, you've got speed, and you've got efficiency in cost as well. So it's a good approach. So it's not, just because it's a cookie cutter approach doesn't mean to say there's not a huge amount of thought goes into making it as efficient as possible.
So just before we move on to other stuff, what are the main water management risks that we haven't covered so far that we need to bring out?
Just hygiene, I suppose, is a...
Yeah. I mean, that's a big one. Legionella testing is increasingly rolled out. No matter the local regulations and laws, we're seeing hyperscalers want to be consistent in their water risk management strategies, which specifically talking about waterborne pathogens. So AWS, for example, has a very uniform process into how they test for, detect, and deal with Legionella. So that's definitely a big one that we see rolled out. Commissioning of these systems, I think, is a big variable in risk. And when you're talking about bringing on all these new hydronic loops, everybody wants is speed to market is critical in the process. And oftentimes they want to cut corners in terms of the proper commissioning of these hydronic loops. They need to be cleaned, they need to be flushed and passivated to properly control corrosion that might be ongoing once you bring them into operation. So the commissioning process, and that's another one that we talk about when we're talking about water usage. People forget that commissioning process. That can be a very large amount of water that you're flushing through. We're seeing larger and larger loops, and you have to turn over that loop volume 6, 7, 8 times to do a proper flushing job. So it can be a substantial amount of water in just the startup of that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to the hygiene topic, cooling towers. If you walk around London, you won't see any. You may do, but when you see those big plumes coming off the top of buildings, that's a cooling tower. It's not on fire, but it's plume, it's vapor, it's water vapor condensing. Quite often, that's something that is conspicuous. The general public oftentimes think that it's smoke, that it's a pollutant. Lost track of the number of times where there's a discussion about CO2 emissions, and they'll show you a big hyperbolic, the big hyperbolic cooling towers with the plume coming off the top. They're assuming that that's smoke. They think it's a chimney or whatever, but it's not. It's water vapor. And if you go to Canary Wharf, there's hundreds of cooling towers there. You wouldn't know they were there, and they're consuming water, and they're probably making those buildings' air conditioning systems very efficient at the same time. But back in the 90s, there was Legionella became a thing. Legionnaires convention, I forget where it was, but there was a hotel. I'm not sure if it was from a cooling tower or from the shower system.
Yeah, I think this was in New York, and that kind of I think several people got Legionnaire's disease and ended up dying. And
it's a pneumonia, basically. You breathe it in, it gets into your lungs, and it can kill you. So back in the 90s, there was some very strict guidance issued in the UK. That means if you have an evaporative cooling system, any system, adiabatic, doesn't matter if it's adiabatic or it's hybrid, or it's a cooling tower, if you've got water that's in contact with a heat source and it's in a stream of air, you have to look after that equipment, and you have to be responsible for that equipment. You can't just leave it up there and forget about it. You've got to monitor the quality of the water. You've got to make sure that it's hygienic, and because if you get any what's called drift, which are these particles of water that could be breathed in. For example, if it's on top of a building and there's an apartment block adjacent to it, or a hospital where it tends to be more elderly or infirm people that are affected by it, you could kill someone. So, but as I say, London is covered in cooling towers, and we're not all dropping dead of pneumonia. The maintenance is more involved with the cooling tower for sure, which is why companies like yourselves, John,
exist. I mean, that's part of the water management strategy that you look at those local regulations, and you have to potentially treat that water to a certain standard to deal with bacteria levels, Legionella, that sort of thing. And so there's monitoring equipment that you can utilize for that. Chemical injection, timers for your controls, and yeah, that's all part of that conversation on the front end of what you need when you're talking about a total water management plan.
Sure. This is completely tangential, and we mustn't go down this particular rabbit hole, but throughout all the conversation on these stages at this event, it's somehow always gone back to a question of society engagement. This industry seems to be rubbish at getting across the message that the work that you guys are doing and other guys in other fields in power generation is not what is portrayed in the public psyche. I really think the industry has to get a grip with that public narrative.
Yeah, the public narrative is definitely not in our favor right now. And we've talked quite a bit on the balancing of the different metrics that you're chasing. And that the WE, the water use efficiency metric that a lot of sites try to abide to specifically is almost a vanity metric. That they can drive down their water usage on site to very low levels, but what is the penalty to power, and what does that do with those indirect water consumption upstream of their facility?
I promised that I'd open it up to some questions, and I've just looked at the clock. Any questions at all from you guys? A hand. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. My name is Rahul. I'm from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. I look at water cooling systems and water use in data centers. One thing that strikes me in this conversation, Tim, you touched upon it, the importance of society, societal impact, and what is the role of data centers in terms of perhaps giving back to society? I think we touched on heat reuse, reclaiming heat. What's the potential there? What are the challenges there? And then my second question relates to affluent water. What are the trends there? What are the challenges there as well? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits of data centers is just our everyday activities. People kind of think about AI as generating images and maybe videos or something, but it's in your everyday use. Your banking apps, your streaming services. So we're all part of the consumers in driving up that demand.
I think there are more things you can do though in terms of reusing a lot of that heat, for sure, and I think there will be more engagement with local municipalities on how you can reclaim some of that energy. Just emitting 200 megawatts of heat into the atmosphere, which you could potentially reuse in some kind of industrial process, for example. I've looked at projects recently where they're using the heat to desalinate water, which can be used for both the cooling system and also for domestic use.
Yeah.
So there's things you can do, not just heating, because then you could only do that in the winter. So there has to be a requirement for it, but for sure there's heat there that can be reused, whether it's for actual heating for domestic properties, or whether it's for heating swimming pools, or you can boost it up for other industrial processes. But that all that depends on where your data center is and what's surrounding it.
Yeah, and it's the same when you talked about the waste effluent and the challenges there. I think it's the same with the waste heat, is the infrastructure and the planning to build that infrastructure. We talked about the reclaim water, the purple pipe water. That is a independent pipe network that is maybe not available in every area. So it's a lot of infrastructure investment.
There was one other hand at the back. If we can quickly, a quick question, sir. Thank you.
Hi, yes. I'm Steve Costello from HiRef. We manufacture heat pumps. I noticed that most of this presentation was about the standard cooling process, which is evaporative. And we're working with a lot of customers now on heat recovery, which was just mentioned. And I'm mindful that the Climate Change Committee yesterday announced that there's going to be a massive shortage in water moving forward. And at the moment it appears that data centers are generating electricity and using water willy-nilly to keep prices down. And there's huge potential for the heat that you generate as a byproduct that you just throw out the window to be used elsewhere. And I've been working with a company recently where they've used rejected heat to heat 600 new homes. And new house builders are not allowed to use gas boilers anymore. So finding somebody that can use that waste heat, okay, you're not going to get rid of all the chiller requirements, but you can certainly make it more efficient and probably more palatable to the general public as well.
Well, and turning that into a water application, as you were talking earlier, I did wonder how soon are we to the day where a savvy hyperscaler, for example, will be getting you guys on board to have systems that feed the local community rather than draw from it.
Well, if it's a heat pump, it's only, I'm assuming we've not got our central heating on in the summer, which is when you may be using water. So it's when that heat source is required, and when the water is required potentially in a data center. So, for example, if it's a hybrid system, you're only using the water when it's above 25 degrees Celsius, for example. You've certainly not got your central heating system on at that moment in time. So then it's a dry system, we're not using any water. And believe me, they're not certainly not using water and electricity willy-nilly. They're trying to drive both down simultaneously, and as I say, they're trying to get the best balance. It's a trade-off. If you don't use water, you will consume more electricity. It's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, obviously the domestic heating is one avenue of using heat, but there's also process heating. So heat pumps can take your waste heat from a data center at 20 degrees and take it up to 200 degrees. So we can generate steam from it. So I think data centers need to look more, and I'm not saying it's a 100% solution, but it is a solution to some of the needs, rather than doing everything on evaporative and wasting water without any thoughts for other ideas.
And heat pumps are used already all across in many industries. You can reclaim heat from all kinds of industrial processes and use that for other elements of the process in factories, food processing, all kinds of things. Data centers really shouldn't be. All a data center is, from my perspective as a heat rejection guy, it's an industrial process, and there's heat. You can boost it up and you can use it elsewhere, but providing you've got a means of transporting that boosted up energy to where you need it. So it's what's surrounding the data center.
So picking up on a couple of these comments, and the overriding theme of the questions was water scarcity, and increasing water scarcity in our rivers, getting lower and peaks and troughs. If we're now having to look at upgrading your systems to cope with this, where should operators look first for performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at your current system, and that's the first place we always look is your current system operating to peak performance. We often come into facilities that could have some improved efficiencies. Even if it is an evaporative system, they can increase cycles if you do some pre-treatment, for example, soften the water, or maybe they need some sort of they have biofilm buildup or scaling. And they need a cleaning, and that's going to improve the efficiency of their chillers or their heat exchangers. And so we can track all those metrics. We can look at the water quality. We can determine if you're running at the peak efficiency that your facility should be, and recommend remediative steps to get it to where it's designed to be operating.
Yeah, I mean, a system on day one on a spreadsheet can be the most efficient system in the world. You can bring all these components together, but you've got to look after them. Control is critical, so by that I mean BMS systems, good control systems. But at the same time, the water that's in a system, in the pipes itself is one element, and also the water that's coming to a cooling tower. It's critical that that's maintained at an appropriate level, not just for hygiene purposes, but to maintain the efficiency of that system. Just a fraction of a degree on average uplift in a process cooling system on a data center. So, for example, 0.2 of a degree difference in average fluid temperature on a chilled water loop with chiller trim would increase your chiller power consumption throughout the year by tens of thousands of kilowatts. On a 1 megawatt chiller.
Yeah.
So it's crucial that the system is maintained well and efficiencies are sustainable, and the quality of the water both in the pipes and what's going over the pipes, if it's a cooling tower or a hybrid cooler, or an adiabatic cooler is crucial to maintain those efficiencies.
Yeah, and then we're talking about efficiencies, and impacts from water treatment perspective. You look at 0.1 millimeter of biofilm can increase, or decrease your efficiency by upwards of 10%.
Yeah.
So that's not a very thick layer, but it's incredibly insulated.
Sure, absolutely, and can be done with your partners today. So look, with the short time we have left, can we look at what operators should do now to make sure that their cooling systems, that their water management strategies are fit for what is ahead, which is an exponential growth in AI-driven growth?
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing more and more as we're building more data centers and they're trying to do speed to market is we're seeing a lot of pre-clean, pre-commissioned equipment coming in for the liquid loops, for the secondary loops, the technical loops that's doing the direct-to-chip cooling. And so, that I think this is improving that scalability. I think there was a conversation upstairs earlier about prefabrication and how that's speeding things along. So we're seeing that in the secondary loops as well for direct-to-chip cooling, is they're bringing in prefabricated, pre-clean, pre-flushed systems and installing them, and that's helping with the commissioning side, helping speed along the commissioning process and the amount of water that's being used, and what would typically be a long flushing and cleaning passivation job.
Final thoughts, Matt?
Final thoughts? I think we're kind of like ships that pass in the night a little bit when we deal with these guys. Is that a lot of what we do is on a spreadsheet. We work on spreadsheets. We work at what the performance of a system, what the water consumption of a system will be on day one. You can test a system, you deliver it, it's on the roof. 6 months later, as I said just a moment ago, if it's not looked after properly, companies like yours, John, that system will be a very different animal very quickly indeed. So what John does with the water on the water treatment side is crucial.
Yeah, and like you said, it shouldn't be looked at as a bolt-on service that's after the fact. It is a collaborative approach, and all these partners need to be brought in to have these discussions to reduce the risk, to make sure we know what needs to be done to potentially keep it at maybe day one efficiencies
From the get-go.
From the get-go.
Gentlemen, both, thank you very much for an illuminating, all too short discussion on water management strategies. But thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel.